Well, hello, everyone. Um, Thanks for joining us today. My name is Zach Cunningham, and I'm the Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub lead with the Transition Accelerator. I have the pleasure of being joined today by Dan Wicklum, CEO of the Transition Accelerator. But we're going to give maybe another minute or two for folks to kind of jump in the webinar. Maybe at this point, I'll just kind of, give a few housekeeping notes. Please use the chat to let us know where you're coming from and what sector you're in, what part of the hydrogen value chain you're associated with. Also, we'd encourage you to use the Q&A box for any questions you may have. And if you do use the chat, we'd ask that you please be respectful in there. Also, note this webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to find a recorded version on our website in the future. And I'd also comment to learn a bit more about the hub and future events, check out our website at calgaryhydrogen.ca.
I see people are still showing up there, Zach. I wonder if we should give just a couple more minutes and yeah, before we formally kick off. This is where we usually talk about the weather in a Canadian webinar or conference call, but don't know if we actually need that step or not.
Yeah, well, at least it's a good news story for the weather here, at least, right? Well, maybe Dan, I don't know, would you like to do a bit of intro to yourself and maybe talk a bit about the Transition Accelerator more broadly? Would that be useful?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just taking a look at the participants, and we've still got a fair number of people joining. How about let's just give folks like a minute.
Sure.
We've had about 300 people registered, which I think is a very good sign for the inaugural event of an entity like this. And our experience is we do have a Transition Accelerator webinar series, and we usually get about half of the people that register actually showing up. So we're getting pretty darn close to that now. Maybe one more minute or so. And I see people are already in the chat there. I see Barb Coral is in. Barb, real friend of hydrogen in the province. She deep experience in industry and government, and she was absolutely critical in launching the Edmonton Hydrogen Hub, which we're actually going to go over. But it's great to see you here, Barb.
Yeah, big fan.
Some other familiar names on there. Wow, it's not going to take much prompting to get people to start being present in the chat. I see. This is great. Great sign. Okay, 130 people. How about 131? They're still sneaking up. How about 30 more seconds, and then there's always a balance between rewarding an on-time start time for the people that get here on time versus delaying it and making sure you get sort of maximize attendance. But I think we're sort of stabling out there. Why don't you take it away, Zach?
Yeah, no, I would ask, do you want to talk a little bit about the Transition Accelerator?
Sure. So my name is Dan Wicklum. I am the CEO of an organization called the Transition Accelerator. We're about 6 years old. We're a virtual organization. We literally exist coast to coast. We've got staff from Victoria to Halifax. We have about 50 people, and we think of ourselves as quite different. We have a real theory of change that is very formally articulated. And essentially what we do is provide sort of an interstitial leadership and analytics so that we work with academia, government of 4 levels, and industry to create new value chains where companies can make money, but also have business models that are aligned with the need to reduce emissions and address climate change. But our number one objective is to create a competitive future Canada. We're an economic organization. That's what we do. And I'm just happen to be sitting in our offices here in downtown Calgary where I live. But again, folks across the country, that's who I am, and that's what the Transition Accelerator is. And I'll just flag, like we have, we'll talk a little bit more about our work in Edmonton on hydrogen, but the transition, why Zach and I are here is that we've been asked to launch and operate the Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub. So that's why Zach and I are here.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, and for myself, I've been with the Transition Accelerator for about 3 years, working closely with Dan. It's been a great honor, and I'm leading the Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub, and I look forward to, I've probably chatted with a lot of folks here already, and if I haven't, I'd encourage them to reach out, and always happy to connect with folks in the hydrogen ecosystem here in Calgary. So, well, let's get right into it if you don't mind, Dan. Well, I would say to start this webinar off in a good way, the Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub would like to take a moment to acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nation, and on the home of the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. So whether you're joining us from the Calgary region or anywhere else in Canada, we encourage everyone watching to reflect on the territory, treaties, and the people where you live, work, and play. So with that, let's go into today's objectives. Do you want to touch on this, Dan?
Yeah, Zach and I have sort of been doing a tag team here. And one thing I'll just flag here, we did it very early in the call, but not all of you might have been here yet, is we really don't want this to be a presentation. We want it to be a conversation. So we really take the chat line when you put things into the chat, comments, questions, we're going to keep track of every single one. Sometimes we'll be able to actually have a discussion about those specific questions and issues today, but we will keep track of all of them, and they will really form the strategic direction of where we take the hub, because you folks actually are the hub. It's not us as Transition Accelerator staff. We'll get into a little bit more about how the hub operates. So please, everyone's introducing themselves now in the chat. Fantastic, super diverse crowd. Lots of people in Calgary, lots of people not, some national personalities. I see, Hydrogen Association of Canada, VP Research in Regina, all great stuff. But keep the substance comments and questions coming as well. That's really, really important.
Yeah, and maybe Dan, if I could too, just to riff on that a little bit, especially this being our first kind of inaugural Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub webinar, certainly how a hub works, any of these kind of really, fundamental questions, feel free to get them in there, and we're happy to really clarify the role of the hub, what our purpose is and what we're trying to do. So
great. Okay, so why are we all here? So for us at the Hub, when people spend their time in engaging in this type of event or any of the events or processes that the Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub will have, the number one thing is we want people leaving saying that was a good use of time. It was focused and clear what we were trying to accomplish, and we accomplished that. So here are today's objectives for the webinar that you're sitting in right now. Provide high-level hydrogen context. It's really just context. This is not a working session. This is to introduce the hub. But in order to understand the hub, you need some context. The second is take that high level sort of global context and bring it down into Alberta's current H2 landscape, second objective. And then the third objective is by the time you leave this, we want you to understand what the Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub is and what its role is in the Calgary ecosystem. So those are three objectives. And I think, today's, the strategic backdrop of today is if you go back 6 months, it's a remarkably different strategic backdrop. We have a fundamentally retooled or retooling of our global economy going on in real time because of what's happening in the States. We understand that. But I guess from our perspective, what we're trying to accomplish at the Accelerator and the Hub doesn't change. We're trying to position Canada to be economically strong, win economically in the short, medium, and especially long term, in what is almost certainly still going to be a world that's driving to reduce emissions because climate change isn't going away. But the number one objective is competitiveness, but it's competitiveness in a low carbon economy. So everything that we're talking about, in today's webinar and the Hub going forward, we get this, and we'll just have to monitor it in real time about how our thinking needs to change collectively, how the Hub's strategy needs to change collectively. But this is the number one marker down, we get this for sure. The world is really uncertain right now. Next slide. So, I think hydrogen's gone through a remarkable sort of evolution in the last sort of 5 years. Very, very typical. Almost always, new technologies or new opportunities come out, and there's sort of a technology buzz and a rush. And I think some of that has come down, and it always does when people dig a little bit deeper into things, what's real, what's not real, what's feasible, what's not feasible. So what we want to do at the Hub always is ground ourselves in sort of real thinking. So when you take a look at what's happening in the news around hydrogen, globally to nationally, in the province and regionally, there's some good news and there's some not so good news. So not so good news, Air Products and Air Liquide, the two largest merchant hydrogen gas suppliers, have they're signaling a cooling of hydrogen enthusiasm. Fair enough. We're we've got some thinking on this about why that is, about how the focusing goes from hydrogen was a panacea for everything down to likely the best use cases. And that you could think of that as like a cooling of hydrogen enthusiasm. Another way to think of it as is people are sharpening up their thinking about where it's actually going to be useful and successful or not, which actually could be taken as a good thing. A couple of other examples here. From the CBC, not that long ago, March 2025, BC hopes for a hydrogen economy are under threat. Again, I think this is just sort of really sort of ground truthing what's real and what's not real. And one of the big things in BC is they're probably seeing an increased role for electricity than they had not that long ago. Another one, over a fifth of new European clean hydrogen capacity is now stalled or canceled. Sounds bad. I'm actually going to say that on these new sort of gold rushes of new technology, sort of if it's an 80% success rate, I'd say that's fantastic. But that doesn't mean everyone's successful. Another one, hydrogen projects, honeymoon is over. I think that's very realistic and real. But what does that mean for us here in Alberta and Calgary? That's really what we're looking for in the hub, and help from you folks. Next slide. Okay, so one of the things that I want to just set a little bit of context here, at the Transition Accelerator, like we think pretty deeply about change, and we try to position change, I think, in a sort of a theoretical construct that sort of so you can make sense of it, and you can sort of assess, is what we're seeing predictable? Is it real? Is it good or is it bad? And one of the things that we've done over time is adopted, I think many organizations have, this notion of an S curve. And when you take a look at the transitions of technology platforms, of sectors, of companies, they almost always follow a sinusoidal curve like that. It's a curve like this, where there's an emergence phase. This is the third of the graph on the left, where change happens super slowly. And there's this experimentation, niche development, learning, policy changes, new technology or business model emergence. And then all of a sudden, there very often comes to a point where there's an acceleration. And this is the middle third of the graph, like large scale adoption. But then complete adoption, the third of the graph to the far right, often takes an awful long time. So I would say for hydrogen, like we're probably very close to the beginning of this curve, like well to the left of the first third of this diagram. Certainly for what we're talking really about in the hub which is use of hydrogen as an energy carrier or use of hydrogen as a zero emission fuel, sort of the same thing. So to me, it's not surprising at all that there's experimentation and failure. Some businesses or projects are falling through. This sort of always happens in transitions if you buy into this model, and we feel strongly that it's actually quite useful to understand and calibrate what's happening. EVs, though, for example, are probably somewhere in this middle phase. Certainly in China, we know that 40% of cars last year sold in China were electric vehicles. Like they're starting to get to that exponential scale in the middle. Hydrogen for use as energy carrier is almost certainly far to the left. And how fast it will progress through that phase, who knows? We're here to try to help it progress faster.
And what would you say, Dan, to, folks that might ask, with transitions, if we look at the rotary phone to the cell phone or landlines to cell phones or, into the computer age, how does it work for technologies that might not be like a direct user improvement or, make life better directly to the user? Do transitions still, the same theory still applies?
So we sure think so at the Transition Accelerator, because we have this tendency to think like economics and technology sort of rule the world and everything is determined by that. But economics and technology work in a policy context as well. So I just said electric vehicles are probably somewhere in the middle third of this graph. If you go back 10 years, I don't think anyone would said without some type of concerted tech dev, without concerted policy, that the ICE engine would be only 60% of sales in China. But that did happen. Policies came out, people drove because of regs, and that crowds in investment into new business model development and tech dev. And I think, again, the same thing is almost certainly to happen in hydrogen. On what timelines, we don't know, because the same drivers, for example, for electric vehicles on passengers is basically the same drivers for using hydrogen as a zero emission fuel. So it's 10, 15 years behind, but we think that it's not always just, you have to think of change in the context of the policy and the reg environment as well, is what I would say. Okay, so again, this is a slide that we use at some of our Transition Accelerator events, and people sort of ask, like, why hydrogen? And we've come up with these two figures on the left. These are real data from Natural Resources Canada. On the left here, it's about 2 years dated, but basically those are the proportions of today's energy carriers in Canada. You can see the amount of electricity we use, biomass, natural gas, gasoline, jet and diesel, coal and oil from the bottom up. And one of the major drivers that we have of change is to reduce emissions. Even take a look at the, even our oil sands companies in Alberta here, even our current UPC provincial government still has a net zero objective by 2050. Will the Trump tariffs and changing of the world order change the ambition, the timing? Probably. But I think that objective is still there. So if you buy into that, the question is, like, what does the future energy system look like? I think everyone understands, like, you can do an awful lot with electrification, and that's likely the cheapest role. But we think that many times the role of electricity is overblown, and which still leaves a gap of what the future energy carriers could look like. And I think it's still an ongoing conversation over different timescales. What is that gap going to be filled by? More electricity, biofuels, hydrogen, fossil fuels with CCS and removals. So we still feel that despite the craziness in the world right now, hydrogen will have, we're adamant that over the medium and long term, it will have a big role. And I would say the jurisdictions and the regions that can get ahead of that curve will likely have a competitive advantage. That's why we have the hub here. Next slide. All right, so maybe just a little bit of history here of Alberta Hydrogen Hub, how we got here today to this webinar. With an awful lot of partners, including the 3 levels of government, federal, provincial, and 5 municipalities, and 2 Indigenous organizations, the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub was launched in 2021. Now, the Transition Accelerator was lucky enough to be the organization that was chosen to launch and operate that hub. We have stepped back from it. That was the plan always, to have basically regional leadership take over. And the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub was just launched or relaunched again or rebranded under new management leadership just a couple months ago, but it's got a long history. It was the first hydrogen hub in Canada. And when we take a look at, we've got some pictures of some of the actual technical work that came out of this that framed up opportunities and framed up sort of new business models. All of this stuff is available on the Transition Accelerator website. We're going to give you an address about where to find this stuff later. But I think this was really a proof of concept that hubs sort of do work. And we're proud of the work that partners did there. Next slide, Zach. So we're not going to go into a level of detail, and this is way too much. We're happy to talk to you offline if you want more information. But there's some very serious projects that took place because of the hub. I mean, there are trucks on the road, there are buses on the road, there are fueling stations happening that exist. There are new technologies being tested in order to reduce cost and speed the development of new business models because of the hub. And again, the hub is the place where people come together in an innovation mash in a defined model to identify opportunities and speed their development. And the purpose of this slide is just to let you know that Edmonton Hub, did have a whole lot of success. And you take a look at some of the companies and organizations that drove it here. So we made a lot of mistakes, and we're hoping not to make them again here. Collectively we learned a lot, but in terms of a demonstration of concept with the federal government, the provincial government, 5 municipalities and 2 Indigenous orgs, and all the private sector, I think everyone declared success and are glad to see that Edmonton Hub still going. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk to just a little bit about what's the approach that the Edmonton Hub took? What was the logic stream or the business model of the hub itself in Edmonton? And what we decided to do is we decided to put every possible value chain on the table. And first of all, I'd say we took a value chain approach. In order for companies to make money, it has to be part of a system where, in this case, you need to make, distribute, use, and potentially store hydrogen. We've got extremely developed value chains for things like gasoline and diesel and natural gas. These things that have developed organically over many, many, many decades. They're remarkably efficient. The people that run them know what they're doing. People can make money at every link of the value chain. It's a prerequisite for a self-sustaining new economy. So we set the objective of self-sustaining value chain, and we put them all on the table. So that we said, like, look, this is a cartoon here, right? Just a sort of demonstration of concept what you're looking at. But like, we took a look at like, what are all the ways to make hydrogen? Then all the ways to upgrade it and transport it, all the ways to use it, and all the ways to store it. And then we started to say, okay, in the unique Alberta environment, which are the ones that make the most sense out of all the possible combinations and permutations of the value chain? So next slide. And we came down to something like this. You take everything on the table and then you narrow it down. And it starts to make a whole lot more sense. So I'm not going to go into this in any detail or either, but the point is value chain approach that makes the most sense in a specific region because of inherent strengths, inherent weaknesses. And the idea is, unless you have a value chain where every step there is a company that makes money, it's not going to work. And that's our objective, to put in place permanent economic activity where companies can make money in a new value chain. And we're here to speed the development of those value chains because we'd rather not take 50 years for them to develop like gasoline or diesel did. So that doesn't mean like you have to have a single discrete individual company at each link. Like maybe one company wants to occupy every single step, that's fine. But the question is like, what do the economics and the technology look like in the new region like Calgary? And what's going to make a self-sustaining value chain on these discrete links?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Dan, and speaks, looking at this, small part of the value chain in this particular use case, right? And there's a lot of options for like comparative analysis. And I think that's really a big strength of what the hub offers as well, right? Is being able to, compare that. What does truck transport look like? What does pipeline transport look like in this particular value chain case, right? And provide those analytics.
And the one thing I would point out here, Zach, before we move on, framing the hub about what role, sort of where and what value chain it plays is really important. We'll get that at the end. And I'm just prompted by, I take a look at a comment there from Keith Clayton. He says he's been in hydrogen production for 60 years in Alberta. So like, first thing we'll say is like, the hub is sort of a new player. And we will recognize and draw on people that have been in this business for an awful long time. But what I would say is like, the objective is not actually industrial, the use of hydrogen for cracking. We actually don't have an export mandate. So we'll start to narrow this down. It's a little bit in this webinar, but on future events about sort of where the boundaries about where the hub wants to play. And I would say, just from the top line, it's really about the use of hydrogen as an energy carrier or a zero emission fuel, which is sort of the same thing. So that's sort of, it doesn't mean that, companies and people like Keith Clayton don't have a role. My God, like they've been in the hydrogen business forever. So we need to absolutely understand and build on what they're doing, learn from them, be humble, and not think that, and not recreate the wheel. So we're really, really in listening mode here and learning mode. Our job is to sort of facilitate rather than come up with all the answers. That's not what we are, and that's not what the hub is about. But next slide.
Yeah, getting a lot of great questions here too, Dan, but maybe I could jump in on this one here if that's all right. Yeah, so I mean, if we look at hydrogen and the cost of energy and potential hydrogen markets, I think it's pretty important to recognize that hydrogen is really technically versatile. But as Dan mentioned earlier, we shouldn't be looking at it like a panacea. It's actually kind of more damaging to the cause if we talk in that manner. But really what we need to do is look through a lens of economics and what alternatives exist. And really at the very, very early stage we're at, we should be looking at, in terms of an energy carrier's use, we should be really looking at targeting areas where there's the lowest delta between the incumbent energy carrier and hydrogen. So I'd ask you to look at the figure on the right here. So this is kind of what we pay for energy in Alberta, based on a bunch of historical ranges. On the left side, we've got Canadian dollars per gigajoule. On the right side, we've got, the energy equivalent cost in terms of kilograms of hydrogen. And you can see we have on the left inner part, we have 2 bars, that's natural gas. the cost per gigajoule for that. And on the right side, we have diesel, particularly in a transportation context. So you can see very clearly that the two bars on the right, they're a lot higher than the bars on the left. So you can see that we pay a lot more for diesel, certainly in that retail range of low 30s to just over $50 a gigajoule, whereas natural gas, we're certainly under $10 for that. And I think that's an important point, when we look at early markets for hydrogen as an energy carrier, it certainly lends itself more to the areas where we already pay a lot for energy already. And essentially some price targets could be for heavy duty transportation we've identified in that $6 to $8 range, accounting for technology efficiencies as well. And you can see for heating, the other horizontal bar in the lower part, the retail price target, it's a lot lower. So it's certainly more challenging to reach that from a production standpoint. But again, on the flip side, that certainly lends to hydrogen made from natural gas. So it's a very compelling reason.
So another way of saying, like this slide, let's keep it super simple, and let's try to start where the task is the easiest. And like trying to make hydrogen and replace an expensive fuel is probably easier than try to make hydrogen and replace a cheaper fuel. So like this is the type of thing that it seems logical, but without the type of analysis and numbers like this, you just talk around things. Whereas what the hub to do is provide the analytics for the key questions that allow people to make decisions quicker. So yeah, I think you're bang on.
But, yeah, and we're getting lots of questions in here. Maybe we'll kind of wait till we wrap up a bit of our presentation to get into it. Hey, I think otherwise we'll run out of time. So well, I could talk a little bit about kind of the current state of play in Alberta, and I think it's kind of, just setting the stage, right? So kind of where are we today? So, based on AER estimates for 2023, give or take, we're probably making around 2.5 million tons on an annual basis here in Alberta. And making up that production is unabated natural gas reforming. That's certainly the largest component, and it's about 5,600 tons per day, and it's all really earmarked for feedstock use. And the majority of that's up in the Edmonton region, the Alberta industrial heartland. We do have some abated natural gas reforming, some carbon capture bolted onto the process, around 1,300 tons per day. And again, all that is really earmarked for feedstock use, and again, is out of the industrial heartland area, certainly. We do more recently have some electrolysis coming online. We're probably in the range of 800 kilograms to maybe a ton per day, and that's with some solar electricity and backed up with the grid. And that's really the CPKC's and ATCO EnPower's facilities that have come online. But you can see it's multiple orders of magnitude smaller than what's in place already. That has taken, like as Dan mentioned, many years to build up this industry. And if we look at, on the other side of it, the use of hydrogen as an energy carrier, well, I called a lot of people. We had a lot of conversations here at the hub, just trying to find out, give or take on an average day, how much are we using? Well, it's about 500 kilograms to about a ton and a half per day. And that's for trucks, buses, cars, and trains within the province. And overall, it's a very small component, right? So that's 0.02% of all hydrogen produced is being used as an energy carrier. So really, we are very much so in the early innings. Now, Dan talked a little bit about kind of some of the bad news stories, and certainly there's lots of them. I think, bad news generally gets more press than good news, but we do have a lot of really great things happening in the province that are worth showing. And these are just a few of them. There's a lot more out there, but CPKC and the fantastic work they're doing and pushing ahead and really being leaders in the industry and proving out a technology. Hydrogen heated homes in Alberta, there's some great successes happening there being proven out by ATCO and Qualico. Hydrogen powered runway sweepers at the Edmonton airport, that's a fairly new development. That's very exciting and a unique use case. U of A recently launching their hydrogen center. And we have fuel cell electric prototype trucks launched at AMTA, another major leader in the hydrogen ecosystem at their Innovation Expo. And ATCO EnPower and CPKC construct, 2 electrolyzer hydrogen production facilities. So really exciting things, and really shows the leadership we have in the province. And a little bit more good news. is the launch of the Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub. And of course, I'm a little bit biased, I guess, but we were publicly announced on March 21st of 2025. But there was, many months of behind the scenes work going on beyond that, before that. We do enjoy support from all levels of government, which is fantastic. And our initial partners are Calgary Economic Development, Wheatland County, and the Transition Accelerator, who leads the strategic direction and the day-to-day operations of the hub. Dan, do you have any comments on this, or I can carry on to what our key objectives are? So
I'd say forge ahead.
let's get into it. Okay, well, yeah, so we have three kind of main objectives at the hub here. So really, we want to help define an economically viable hydrogen economy for the Calgary region. We want to assist in aggregating and connecting regional hydrogen demand with supply. And we want to help accelerate pilots and projects along the hydrogen value chain. So what does that mean? These objectives, that's wonderful. What are the main activities that you see on a day-to-day basis happening at the hub? Well, there's three big ones here. First, convening and leading sector expert advisory teams, which we're going to touch on a bit further here in the presentation. Second, identifying Calgary region opportunities and de-risking them through in-hub, in-house analytics that we perform. And third, just be a general connecting force across the value chain in the Calgary region. Now, touching a bit further in depth on some of these actions. So in terms of sector expert advisory teams, we have launched with 6 in total, and they cover a range of sectors, really where we see hydrogen could play a role. Well, why do this? I think it's important to recognize that, at the hub, we consider ourselves experts on hydrogen, but we certainly are not experts in all sectors, and we do not claim to be that. So really, we look for input, we look for that real world information from folks that are living it day to day on their 9 to 5, right? So really, we want these folks to help advise us on priorities, opportunities, barriers, and really importantly, knowledge gaps. What don't they know, and how can we assist in that if possible? And this really provides a real world overlay to help guide our actions and guide all of our techno-economic analysis. So we're not just writing a report, it's actually something useful and actionable that can be taken. Any thoughts, Dan? I see you.
Yeah, no, I think, and then we're getting down into how the hub is structured and what it actually does. And one thing I would say, Zach, like these teams are launched, right? So when we were secured by Calgary Economic Development as sort of the lead entity, lead funder on this, they had scoped out which of these, the teams that they wanted to launch. And I think they did a fine job. I don't think we would have done anything different if we were sort of leading that. But these teams are launched. They're populated really by sectoral experts. And I think the key for me is that these teams are independent, and they're really there for the public good. So they're there to advise us as hub staff about barriers, potential fixes, problems, and what needs to change so that companies or organizations like you folks that are on the call can do what you do. Be a better regulator, create a better policy environment, be a company that launches projects that make money, potentially with new partners that you hadn't understood existed before. So I think for me, the key is that these teams are up and they're running, varying degrees of, I guess, organization, but they're populated with sectoral experts. And just because the people are on the team doesn't mean they have any inside track. There's no advantage to being on these teams. So they don't get information any earlier or any different information from core hub staff like the Zach and team. They are there to give advice about how what the hub should do to be most effective. And I think that's a critical part here, that these teams are really public good. No one's got an inside track, or no one has some type of advantage or competitive advantage by being on these teams or not. They're here to advise the hub.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dan. Certainly we want the work we do to benefit Calgarians, Albertans, all of Canadians really with what we're doing, right?
Cool.
All right, so yeah, tying into that, the knowledge gaps piece that we are informed through the sector teams, sector advisory teams, really helps drive us to understand, what type of independent, objective, data-driven analytics are needed. And we see our role certainly as a third-party trusted source for this information, unbiased and, really data-driven. And what we want to do is, through these pieces of work, as Dan mentioned, on the previous slide, is we're just systematically working through the value chain. We're talking, and, qualitatively and quantitatively, right? Talking to each person along the value chain, understanding the conditions they need for hydrogen adoption to be successful. And really, I think an important part is, if you build it, they may not come. And I think we've kind of seen that with a lot of projects so far, right? So I feel strongly that strategic analysis can help with that. And here I would encourage anyone, that's interested, certainly in the Calgary region, that may just be tuning into this and this initiative. I'd encourage them to check out the report that's on the screen right now, Towards a Fuel Hydrogen Economy in the Calgary region. That was done by one of our principals with a couple other co-authors. And that was really the main impetus for the Calgary Hub being started, identifying those opportunities and synergies there. Any thoughts, Dan, or good?
No, I think you nailed it. When our team is keeping track again of every comment and question, so please keep those coming. Super helpful. And some of them are quite detailed and technical. Not surprising. Like on this call, there'll be a range of folks where hydrogen is sort of new and learning to people that have been in the business for 60 years. So this really is an intro call, not meant to get into the technical details. But we want to know, like, what would be most useful for you. So you put that in the chat. But as we hold future events, physical ones and virtual ones, that's where we will refine thinking based on everyone's input and feedback about, like, what is the highest use of our analytical capacity to answer what questions. And if we're not answering your detailed technical questions today that you put in the chat, it's really because this is really an intro about how the hub's going to work and what's next. But we're not losing your feedback. So keep it coming.
Yeah, and certainly I'd agree 100% with you, Dan, and say that also we will have a survey at the end of this webinar. Please fill it out and please help guide us. We want to know what we should be doing webinars on and different events that circle around that. So it's very much active engagement. All right, so kind of the third piece here. So connecting players at different value chain links. Really, there's a lot of conversations that may not occur without a bit of coordination from a hub-like entity. We really want to be able to connect producers with users. We want to connect the regulators with the regulated. Be that connective tissue between government, industry, academia, and all interested parties, actually. It's an open door, right? So if you're interested, you want to be involved, great. And a lot of how we're going to be doing that is by hosting regular events. And those are going to be really kind of spinning up in June. And we're going to be doing a lot of different webinars and workshops and a variety of ways to get engaged and kind of bring the community together. All right. Now, fun slide, what the hub does not do. So, I guess I'll give a little bit of a background too. So there's a lot of hubs, right? We have, in a US context, what's a hub? And you have accelerators and hubs, and, what does it all mean, right? So I think to clarify, in a Canadian context, in a Calgary Region Hub context, this is what the hub does not do. So we don't have $7 billion worth of funding like US hubs do. So we do not directly develop, launch, or operate hydrogen projects. Also, we do not greenlight or endorse projects. That's really not our role to do that. We also, again, we do not provide funding or one-on-one advice to startups and projects. As much as we would love to provide advice and talk to everyone, there's just so many folks out there, and there's only so many hours in the day. And once the inbox fills up, there's only so much we can do and we have capacity for. Also, as Dan mentioned earlier, we don't give competitive advantage to individuals or companies. I'll tell you right now, I'm super happy if you can use us to your competitive advantage. Go ahead. We'd be more than happy if you do that, but we cannot provide certainly any sort of favoritism or advantage on our end. And like as Dan mentioned in the previous slide, we do not give out fancy membership cards. It would be very cool. I would kind of like having a little hub membership card, but we don't have one. So if I don't have one, no one's going to have one, really. So there is no in or out of the hub. You being here today in this webinar, that's being a part of the hub. Being on the mailing list, getting involved, coming to any events, that's just as much being involved as you can be. So any thoughts on that, Dan?
No, I think you nailed it. Like, the hub is not a legal structure. It's, again, you're not in or out of the hub. You're not a member. It is a place where we can learn from each other. We can answer questions collectively, and we hope that it will help people perform their job better, no matter what job it is in relation to a hydrogen ecosystem or hydrogen value chain. And the third point, like, we don't have funding to give out. Like, that's not our job. It's still, private sector funding and public funding. And when we say we don't give advice to startups, like, it's not like if someone sort of says, like, could you do this analysis and write me a 5-page report? We're going to say, gosh, sorry, it's not our role. But like the opportunity to have discussions, we hope is going to be constant in webinars, in events that we have. So, and those kinds of things, like, let's get into the deep questions and the one-on-one conversations and group discussions and workshops. So but it's really that notion of, like, we're not a consulting company that people can get tailored advice. That's what that means. So
yeah, great point. I think it's important to note that we do have a physical location, as you said. We are here down in downtown Calgary, right? So we do have an office, but the hub is more of like the sum of all the connections, all the activity happening in the region, more so than a physical workshop, where stuff is happening. All right, so leaving some time for questions here. How to connect. You can connect and be a part of the hub by joining the hub mailing list on our website, attending events, as I mentioned. A lot of this is going to get spinning up in June. Going to webinars, you're here right now, reading our hub reports, and following our social media for updates. So, what are we working on right now and our initial priorities? We have some really exciting things coming down the pipeline. Wheatland County, we're doing a hydrogen opportunity assessment for them. Very exciting, wonderful folks over there. Really, really enjoy working with them. And we're doing a really exciting piece of work to understand, what role do they have in a future kind of hydrogen economy, being so adjacent to Calgary. So it's a pretty interesting piece of work. Looking forward to that being released. We are also looking at the district heating system here in Calgary. It's a pretty unique opportunity, and they already have blended hydrogen. So we're looking at kind of building on that knowledge and seeing what maybe a more of a long-term, larger project could look like, at least. Then we're looking at heavy trucking corridor analysis. So that's using our minimum viable corridor model, and really focusing initially, certainly on the Calgary-Edmonton corridor, and understanding, again, that qualitative and quantitative checklist, and how do we make sure in that specific corridor context, how do we satisfy everyone along the value chain that they can make something happen. In addition, we're going to be having monthly in-person events starting in June. So I would recommend everyone, tune into our social media, and we're going to make sure everyone's well aware of that. And kind of right now, there's tons and tons of engagement happening. As Dan mentioned, it's all about the conversation. So, if you're in the Calgary region, you're in the hydrogen space, and I haven't talked to you, or you haven't talked to the hub team at all, reach out. We'd be happy to chat. So.
And if I was to riff on that a little bit, we had one question in the chat a period of time ago, but asked the question, like, why is Wheatland County a partner? And the reality is they brought funding to the table. So when the project was being framed up by the 3 levels of government, that they were essentially written in and part of it from that perspective. There's no sort of preferential treatment. We'd be happy to work or have other adjacent counties to the core of the city of Calgary participate in the hub, just like everyone else can. And frankly, if there's other funding available that other jurisdictions want to bring in and somehow deploy strategically or synergistically with the resources that are already on the table, then my gosh, let's have a conversation. But but essentially, Wheatland County brought dollars to the table, and that's why they're a partner, because they're a funder. The other thing I would say is, again, like, the hub is being launched now, but there's been a fair bit of work over the last year in building the momentum to be able to get to the point where we are today. So the foundation report that Zach flagged, about 6 or 7 slides back, that was the key document that laid out, what hydrogen economy could look like in Calgary, and gave people, I think, the momentum and the impetus to say, yeah, we should probably launch a hub to help speed some of these ideas. And a couple of the ideas that were in that report were essentially this notion of district heating and heavy truck corridor. They're sort of seen as like gimmies. It doesn't matter how long we sort of analyze things after a launch, they're going to emerge as a priority. So let's just start working on them. So there is work going on there as well. So that doesn't mean these, and this is very clearly framed as an initial priority. It doesn't mean that no priorities can't get added or these ones could get shifted. But the idea is we want to emphasize pace, not get bogged down into administrative decision-making and heavy governance. We want to really go at pace, learn as we go, declare success. If we fail at something, learn from it, move on. And that's really why we're actually starting to do stuff right now. So.
Great. Well, I've got a lot of questions here, Dan. Maybe we could do some quick rapid fire. How do you think about that?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so I'll skip this and go right to our stay engaged part. So what is the hub's role in defining and developing the talent and skills needed for the hydrogen industry?
So let me take that one. And again, I'll draw on our experience in Edmonton. And that's going to be a constant theme here in Calgary, is to basically say, look, we launched and ran that hub in Edmonton for 3 years. What worked and what didn't work? The same question came up in Edmonton. And what happened is a couple of funders, and I'm remembering both the provincial government and the federal government, understood that this question was being asked. And they cobbled together some funding. And this is essentially the parts of the federal government and the parts of the provincial government whose job it is to understand sort of future skills and workforce. And they basically learned from the hub that this was a key question in people's minds. It might be a barrier. Companies might not invest in a hydrogen project or hydrogen company unless they could be convinced the skills were going to be there in the future. So to me, it was a great example of the Edmonton hub being the place where questions were asked. And then the Transition Accelerator, we're not a skills organization, but we helped put together a deal where the skills organization in the province took that into their own strategic planning and answered the question. So there was a very deliberate analysis done and a series of meetings and workshops and outreaches about that issue in Edmonton. So whether that is as important here in Calgary to do from scratch again, whether we can resurface the work that we did in Edmonton, those are the types of things that the answers that we can give now that we see the questions been asked in the chat. So, and I also think, just as a little bit of an aside, it also shows like how the hub works. Like the hub is not Zach and his team doing all the work. The hub is the place where there's a focusing of questions, a prioritization of questions, and then understanding what's the best way to answer those questions. And in some cases, it could be Zach and his technical, his engineers doing an analysis and putting it into the public domain for review and finalizing in a report saying, this was a top question that was very important to a critical mass of people, institutions, organizations in Calgary. They asked the question and here's the answer. And it's pretty darn good. In other cases, a barrier or a question might come up and us at the Transition Accelerator, like we're just not equipped, not our gig, not our expertise. But we can help sort of make sure that the folks that do have the expertise, in whatever role they have, understand that this is key and they can take it on. So the hub is not here as for Zach and staff to do all the work. It's really more around focusing, doing some work, but focusing the work of others so that others can do their job better and make quicker and better decisions. So that's sort of the answer on that specific HR question, but also a little bit of an illustration about what the hub is and what the hub is and how it works. So.
Great. So we have a question. So we have a question here, and maybe I'll take a first little crack at it if that's okay, Dan. And I'm
Can
sure
I say one more thing?
Sure.
So the person that led that work for us when we did it at the Edmonton hub was Pat Huffnagel-Smith, and I can see that she's actually on the chat here. So if anyone's sort of interested in contacting Pat directly, sorry, Pat, I might just made a lot of work for you, but she's straight from the horse's mouth about what that project was and what she did. And it was a great success, but if anyone's interested in skills, perhaps, trying to get in touch with Pat Huffnagel-Smith.
Great. Okay, well, here we have another question, and maybe I'll answer the first bit. I'm sure you'll have lots to add on, Dan, but the question is, to what degree will the Calgary hub follow the pathway of the Edmonton hub? And maybe I'll talk a bit about not so much the process, but about how the Edmonton and Calgary regions are slightly different. Just very quickly, I would say, Edmonton and Calgary, they're fundamentally different cities. They're starting from different positions. Edmonton has a very broad and developed refining sector with a lot of hydrogen available, certainly for the feedstock uses. Calgary is very different. We don't have that refining sector here. There's much more of a compelling case for a distributed small-scale production of hydrogen within the Calgary region. And there's just different people, different starting places, and different, it's just going to look a little differently, I think, than Edmonton. And that's okay. I firmly believe these hubs are not cookie cutter, right? We have to take the regional nuances and considerations in. Dan?
I'll say the same thing, but in different words, just to emphasize the point. Like, to what extent will we follow the same trajectory or do the same things in Calgary compared to Edmonton? I would say to the extent it makes sense and to the extent it's useful for you people on the call. Like, you are actually the hub. So like we'll give advice and, take advice, but I mean, the last thing we want to do is recreate the wheel. So we're not going to do another analysis that was done at Edmonton that is equally applicable here. But we're also pretty sure that the issues are going to be different here. We don't have a core industrial hydrogen economy here like we do in the industrial heartland in Edmonton. So it's going to be different. And we just need to be, understand the differences and take the framework that we have, which is concentrate on value chains, make sure that we have the courage to ask and answer the tough questions and execute. So that's, I guess, what I would say. And Zach, can I have one more comment here? First of all, Pat Huffnagel-Smith is apparently not mad at me because she put her email in the chat. So if you want to talk to someone about hydrogen skills, get in touch with her. I'm just going over this here, to the comment, in the chat, and I've got one comment, this is actually the hub in action. So I see Keith Clayton has put into the chat, he says, I'll talk to anyone. I was involved in electrolytic hydrogen and reformation. He lives in Wheatland County, was involved in bringing the hydrogen production facility to Wheatland in the production of fertilizer.
Great.
So if you want to understand what's happening in Wheatland County, electrolytic hydrogen, production of fertilizer, get in touch with Keith. So that is actually how the hub works. So, the hub will be sort of what you make it. And you sort of need to roll up your sleeves and get out there. I saw another few up there. Where was another one? Jordan McRobbie. He talks about his company, Utility Global, and they're looking for a partner. So this is sort of how the hub works. It sort of is what you make it. We will do this much more formally in understanding what you folks want or what you need and make a deliberate attempt to connect you with other folks. But it doesn't mean you can't start right now. And I saw Jordan put his contact in the email there, or his email in the chat list. So
excellent. Yeah, and I had a good chat with him at CHC. He's a wonderful guy. I certainly encourage folks to get in touch. We got a question here if we'll be sending out slides after. So this will be recorded, and we're going to make sure this is on the website. So we'll have a good record of that. Another question for you, Dan. I know we're running out of time here, but so the gist of it is, hydrogen is widely discussed, as a decarbonization method, but there's also important downstream products, such as hydrogen derivatives, e-fuels, methanol, that have also a significant potential for decarbonization. So in the hub, is the hub just focused on hydrogen, or does it also focus on hydrogen derivatives, and to what extent? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm going to have an answer. It's going to seem a little bit glib and a little bit trite, but if there's a critical mass of people in Calgary that think that is a real strategic direction where the Calgary region should go, and we understand that via surveys, feedback on this type of things, and on chat lines, personal communication at physical meetings and so on, then that's the direction the hub will go. Think of us sort of as a shell architecture that you can mold and influence. We have a governance structure, so the Transition Accelerator has a board of directors, so we're not legally accountable to you folks on the call, but we're a public good organization, and the Hydrogen Hub is a public good entity. So we would need to listen, and to the extent that there's a critical mass, we'll go in that direction. I can tell you from a substance perspective, we are about 7 months, the Transition Accelerator is 7 months into a very large 10-month project for the government of BC that is taking a deliberate look at e-fuels, which is really what are the techno-economics of essentially every e-fuel out there. Now, it's sort of in a BC context, but it will be completely applicable, I think, anywhere in the country. And the BC government was interested in this because they sort of wanted to know, like, where should they be placing their bets? You know, what's likely to be successful in the long term? How can they make money at it quicker if they were to support which types of technology platforms? So, you know, the other thing it can do is follow the transition accelerator proper, just not the hydrogen hub, if you're looking in sort of more things to have to do with energy. But we'll also end up telling all of you hub folks here about some of the other things that are happening in the country, not just the transition accelerator, other important things globally. Zach and I have been asked to go to Rotterdam for a week to the World Hydrogen Conference in 2 weeks. And we've got a whole agenda set up to basically understand the current state of play for hydrogen in different regions and different technologies. And one of the key things we're going to do is bring back intelligence and brief you folks, likely, and also set up direct meetings, likely virtually, with key companies, key personalities, so that you can actually interact with them directly. So like Germany is often pointed to as sort of a leading hydrogen entity. Okay, let's get an expert from Germany on a webinar so that you folks can talk to them and sort of learn and maybe challenge, like what's real and what's not real. So that's, I guess, what I would say, again, that notion of, you know, e-fuels, but our job is sort of be a connector and, you know, bring intelligence as much as we can back to you folks. Again, you can do your jobs better, make quicker and better decisions.
Great. Well, I know we're being cognizant of time here. We have a couple more questions I think would be kind of interesting to hear your thoughts on, Dan, and not to put you on the spot, but we have an interesting question more about like transition theory and value chains, you know. So when you were looking at, you know, hydrogen value chains and understanding the gaps and just analyzing that, did you actually look at value chains that were working in an Alberta context and compare them to try to understand like how to fix these value chains, or how did we come up with these insights on how to look at these value chains?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to give a bit of a rambly answer here. And whoever asked that question, come to our grand opening or Stampede event or whatever it is, and we can you know get into the details of this. I would say when I take a look at it, I think there's really only one value chain that is ready for prime time, where some people can make money at it. And it's probably the use of hydrogen for locomotives. So this is why Canadian Pacific Kansas City is frankly leading the world in retrofitting their diesel engines to use hydrogen. And the issue there is hydrogen, actually, this is going to sound odd, but we can make hydrogen on a per gigajoule basis cheaper in Alberta than we can diesel. Blue hydrogen, with some type of reforming technology. It's not competitive with diesel because there's no distribution system in place, and it costs an awful lot to distribute the fuel. But you think about it, like trains actually sort of are their own distribution system. All they need to do is add 2 or 3 more cars with hydrogen, and they can fill up at a very central location like they do with diesel, and be their own distribution as they go along the tracks. So that's a really, I think, a good example about why CPKC is so bullish on hydrogen. You know, they're intense partners of ours sort of right now. And that's the use case that makes sense. They see a grand future for hydrogen in trains, locomotives, and they see a grand future for CPKC and actually the business of retrofitting other companies' locomotives as well. But actually, to be blunt, when I take a look at any other value chain, use of hydrogen to move heavy transport, Class 8 trucks, use of hydrogen to move cars, to heat buildings, I don't think there is an economic use case, and we just need to be, I think, have the courage to say that. The way we would approach it then is like, why not? And are there not the regs in place, safety standards? Is it a cost issue? Almost always it is. So how do you address that? Scale, some type of value-added products and so on. So it's like taking a look at those value chains that, based on our analysis, seem the easiest, but still not viable, and try to fix things that would make them viable. And that's not always just like, government, give us money. That's not a real strategy. It's got to be like, what could this value chain look like in 15 years? And what's the track to get to this concept of like a minimum viable economic Class 8 trucking corridor? It's often a model we use. So hopefully that's, again, it was a rambly answer, and I think I probably had too much time, but yeah.
Great, Dan. Really appreciate it. Hey, I think we're at time here. So I guess from my end, I would certainly want to thank everybody for joining kind of the inaugural Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub webinar. I would encourage you, as the slide on the screen says, please join our mailing list. Please reach out to the email below and let's have a conversation and check out some of the other hydrogen work that we have done at the Transition Accelerator to really get a good details on the insights. Dan, do you have any like closing comments?
I don't think so. Really glad to be with you folks. Super encouraged by the amount of energy in the chat here. Love that people are sort of letting go to the edge of the pool and just starting to swim, meaning like introducing themselves to the whole crowd. This is who I am. This is what we do. Contact me. That's the hub in action. The hub is really about sort of innovation collisions. And we're always open to advice. Please do sign up to the mailing list. Follow us on social media, because that's sort of that's how we communicate. And yeah, super excited to meet people at our physical events. And the next physical event, Zach, is?
We'll be having our grand opening, and then we'll be kind of announcing that more on social media as we go forward. So stay tuned. All the more reason to subscribe.
With a very special guest, I think, at that
That's right.
opening. So
That's right.
Sort of a little bit of a primer there. So yeah, thanks everyone. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to working with you.
All righty. Thank you.